Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighbourhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. This was decidedly the case when Netherfield Park was let at last to Mr. Bingley, a young man of 4,000 or 5,000 a year. For Mrs. Bennet of Longbourn House, the business of her life was to see her 5 daughters married. "It is a delightful thing," she declared to her husband, "to know that you will be gone, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not." Mr. Bennet, a gentleman of quick parts, sarcastic humour, and a reserved temper, was content to observe his wife's rapacious celerity. "I have," said he, "a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least." He was, indeed, one of those husbands whose comfort as a hidden object his wife did not understand. The Bennet daughters were a mixed assortment. Jane, the eldest, was of a composed and gentle temper, who thought well of everybody. Elizabeth, the second, possessed a lively, playful disposition, which delighted in anything ridiculous. Mary, the only plain one, had worked hard for knowledge and accomplishments, and was always impatient for display. And the 2 youngest, Catherine and Lydia, were vain, ignorant, idle, and uncontrolled, their heads filled with little else but offices and balls, to the great vexation of their father and the indulgent folly of their mother. The Meryton assembly soon brought the neighbourhood together with the Netherfield party. Mr. Bingley was an immediate success, lively and unreserved, danced every dance, was angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at Netherfield. His admiration for Jane Bennet was evident. "She is," he declared to his friend, "the most beautiful creature I ever beheld." His friend, Mr. Darcy, was another matter. He was a fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report of his 10,000 a year was in his favour. However, his manners soon declared him to be proud, above his company, and above being pleased. He was found disagreeable, and Elizabeth Bennet, in particular, took a decided dislike to him. Having been slighted by other men, she was forced to sit down for 2 dances, and overheard Mr. Bingley urge his friend to join the set. "Which do you mean?" said Darcy, and turning round, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth. "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. I am in no humour at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men." Elizabeth's spirits, however, were not affected, and she related the story with great spirit amongst her friends. Not long after, Jane was invited to Netherfield by Bingley's sisters. Mrs. Bennet, in a happy contrivance, insisted Jane go on horseback, as it looked likely to rain. The scheme worked. Jane was caught in a downpour and fell ill, obliging her to remain at Netherfield. Elizabeth, despising the absurdity of her mother's plan, but alarmed for her sister, walked the 3 miles to nurse her. Her appearance at Netherfield, with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise, caused no small consternation among the Bingley sisters, particularly Miss Caroline Bingley, who possessed a decided preference for Mr. Darcy herself. During her stay, Elizabeth found herself in frequent, pointed conversation with Mr. Darcy. His strained civility and his silent observation piqued her. In the drawing-room one evening, Miss Bingley observed, "Mr. Darcy is meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow." Mr. Darcy replied, "My mind was more agreeably engaged. I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow. "And your defect," Elizabeth said to him, after a sharp exchange on the subject of pride, "is a propensity to hate everybody." "And yours," he replied with a smile, "is wilfully to misunderstand them." Though he found her impertinent, her liveliness only added to the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. He began to find her face rendered uncommonly intelligent, and found himself listening to her against his will. Elizabeth, for her part, found him only arrogant. "My good opinion once lost," Darcy declared, "is lost forever." "That is a failing indeed," cried Elizabeth. "But you have chosen your fault well." "I cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me." The attention of Longbourn was soon captured by a different party. A letter arrived from Mr. William Collins, a cousin who, upon Mr. Bennet's death, was to inherit the estate. He wrote of his intention to make amends for the entail by selecting a wife from among his cousins. Mr. Collins arrived and proved to be a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25. His air was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. He was, in short, a conceited, pompous, narrow-minded, silly man, whose chief conversation consisted of detailing his good fortune in securing the patronage of the Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh of Rosings Park. He extolled her affability and condescension, which was chiefly proved by her having advised him to marry. His choice of wife settled first on Jane, but Mrs. Bennet hinted she was likely to be soon engaged. Mr. Collins, with perfect composure, shifted his intentions to Elizabeth. At the same time, the officers of the militia quartered in Meryton introduced a new figure. Mr. Wickham, a young man of most gentlemanlike appearance and happy readiness of conversation. He soon singled out Elizabeth and related to her a most melancholy history. He had been the godson of the late Mr. Darcy, who had intended to provide for him with a valuable living. But the present Mr. Darcy, from jealousy and pride, had disregarded his father's wishes and left him to the mercy of chance and poverty. This intelligence, delivered with such seeming candour and an air of diffident integrity, cemented Elizabeth's prejudice. "That is the wickedest thing I ever heard," she declared. All of Darcy's arrogance was now explained by this inhuman cruelty. The Netherfield ball arrived. Elizabeth, who had hoped to dance with Wickham, was mortified to find he was not present, a clear sign, she felt, of his fear of Mr. Darcy. The evening was a trial. She was forced to endure the obsequious civilities of Mr. Collins, and found herself, to her astonishment, standing up for the first two dances with Mr. Darcy himself. Their conversation was a strained battle of wits. "We are each of us," she observed, "of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak, unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room." Worse, her family's conduct mortified her. Her mother spoke loudly of Jane and Bingley's imminent engagement. Mary performed a vocal piece with a pedantic air, and her father openly insulted Mr. Collins. Elizabeth saw that Mr. Darcy's eyes were upon them, in a manner which defined their meaning. The day following the ball, Mr. Collins requested a private audience with Elizabeth. He began his solemn proposal, detailing his reasons for marrying. "First," he said, "that I think it a right thing for every clergyman in easy circumstances to set the example of matrimony. Secondly, that I am convinced it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, that it is the particular advice and recommendation of the very noble lady whom I have the honour of calling patroness." Elizabeth stopped him. "You are too hasty, sir," she cried. "Accept my thanks, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than decline them." Mr. Collins, however, was not to be dissuaded. It is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept. I shall therefore conclude that you are not serious, and you may assure yourself that I shall never reproach you on that head when we are married." "You could not make me happy," she cried, "and I am convinced I am the last woman in the world who would make you so. I am perfectly serious in my refusal." When Mrs. Bennet learned of it, her transports of rage were violent. She flew to her husband, who called for Elizabeth. "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth," said Mr. Bennet. "From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." Mr. Collins, his pride wounded, withdrew his suit with offended dignity. Within 3 days, his attentions were transferred to Elizabeth's particular friend, Miss Charlotte Lucas. The neighbourhood was shocked when, in a shorter time, their engagement was announced. "I ask only a comfortable home," Charlotte explained to a dismayed Elizabeth. "I am not romantic, and considering Mr. Collins' character, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state." This news was followed by another blow. The Netherfield party departed suddenly for London, with no intention of returning. Jane was left desolate, and Elizabeth was convinced the fastidious Miss Bingley and the proud Mr. Darcy had conspired to separate her sister from a man who truly loved her. In the spring, Elizabeth travelled to Kent to visit the new Mrs. Collins at the Hunsford parsonage. Their life was dominated by Rosings Park and its awful mistress, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, a tall, large woman whose manner was authoritative and whose questions were impertinent, beyond the bounds of civility. "What is your usual income?" she demanded of Elizabeth, and "Are any of your younger sisters out in society?" Soon after her arrival, Rosings received 2 visitors, Colonel Fitzwilliam and, to Elizabeth's utter astonishment, Mr. Darcy. Darcy's behaviour was puzzling. He visited the parsonage frequently, often sitting for 10 minutes at a time, without opening his lips. During a conversation with the amiable Colonel Fitzwilliam, she received a new shock. The Colonel mentioned that Darcy had recently saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage. Elizabeth needed no more. The friend was clearly Bingley, the imprudent marriage to her own sister. All her prejudices returned with renewed force, fuelled now by the direct injury to Jane. That very evening, as Elizabeth sat alone, Darcy entered. After a few moments of agitated silence, he burst forth, "In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. His speech, however, quickly turned from affection to his sense of her inferiority, to the degradation he felt, and the family obstacles which judgment had always opposed to inclination. She was enraged. When he finished, stating he solicited her hand, she replied, "If I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly." She enumerated her accusations, his ruining the happiness of a most beloved sister, his shameful and unpardonable treatment of Mr. Wickham, and his arrogance, conceit, and selfish disdain of the feelings of others. "From the very beginning," she declared, "your manners formed the groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike. And I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." Darcy, pale with anger, listened. "And these," he said, "are the sentiments which are to puzzle me. Thank you for explaining it so fully." He confessed to separating Bingley and Jane, claiming he believed Jane's composure of temper showed a want of particular regard. Of Wickham, he said only, "I am not ashamed of the part I acted." He concluded, "My wishes," he said, "are unchanged, but my feelings. I can now only wish you health and happiness." The next morning, Darcy found Elizabeth walking and handed her a letter. She read it with a flutter of spirits that soon turned to absolute shame. In it, he explained all. Regarding Wickham, the truth was startling. Wickham, he wrote, was the son of his father's steward, a profligate and dissipated young man. The late Mr. Darcy had left him a bequest of £1,000 and the recommendation for a living, which Wickham had refused, demanding, and receiving, £3,000 in its place, which he soon dissipated. Years later, Wickham reappeared, destitute, and, in the most unprincipled act of all, had attempted to elope with Darcy's own 15-year-old sister, Georgiana, solely to obtain her £30,000. Elizabeth's shame was immediate and profound. She grew absolutely ashamed of herself. "How despicably I have acted!" she cried. "I, who have prided myself on my discernment. I, who have valued myself on my abilities. How humiliating is this discovery! Pleased with the preference of one, and offended by the neglect of the other. I have courted prepossession and ignorance, and driven reason away. Till this moment, I never knew myself." Elizabeth returned to Longbourn, her view of the world entirely altered. Months later, she agreed to a tour of Derbyshire with her aunt and uncle, the Gardeners. Their travels took them near Pemberley, Darcy's estate. Hearing from the servants that the family was not at home, Elizabeth agreed to visit. The estate itself was magnificent, a large, handsome stone building where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, gave them a tour, praising her master at every turn. "He is the best landlord and the best master," she said, "that ever lived. Some people call him proud, but I am sure I never saw anything of it. To my fancy, it is only because he does not rattle away like other young men." Elizabeth listened, with a more gentle sensation towards him than she had ever felt. As she stood admiring his portrait, thinking of his disposition and regretting her refusal, Mr. Darcy himself suddenly came forward from the road. His appearance threw her into the utmost confusion. But his manners were wholly changed. He was gentle, perfectly well-bred, and inquired after her family with solicitude. The next day he brought his sister, Georgiana, to meet her. Elizabeth was confounded by his real wish to introduce them. This was the man, she thought. This the preservation of whose good opinion she had calculated. What must he think of me? This promising new acquaintance was shattered by terrible news from Longbourn. A letter from Jane arrived. "Dearest Lizzie, something has occurred of a most unexpected and serious nature. Lydia has eloped with one of Wickham's brother officers. With Wickham! They are gone. To Scotland." Elizabeth was in despair. She knew Wickham would never marry Lydia without a fortune. As she absorbed the shocking details, Darcy entered. Seeing her distress, he instantly understood. He was grave, and said only, "I am grieved indeed." Grieved, shocked. He blamed himself, stating, "I, who knew what he was, to preserve a silence. It has been my own doing." He departed abruptly, and Elizabeth believed she would never see him again. This disgrace to her family had fixed an gulf between them. Elizabeth and the Gardeners rushed home to a house in consternation. Mr. Bennet, in a rare moment of self-reproach, confessed, "Lizzie, I have been a selfish, selfish man. It has been my own fault. Who is to fight Wickham and make him marry her, if he comes in his way? All hope seemed lost until a letter arrived from Mr. Gardiner. They were found. Wickham had agreed to marry Lydia, on condition of his receiving an annuity, and his debts of over £1,000 being paid. Mrs. Bennet was in raptures, immediately planning the wedding clothes. Lydia and her dear Wickham visited Longbourn, and Lydia, exactly as she had used to be, vain, ignorant, idle, and uncontrolled, let slip during a dinner that Mr. Darcy was at her wedding. This incautious remark stunned Elizabeth. She wrote at once to her aunt. Mrs. Gardiner's reply revealed the truth. It was Mr. Darcy who had found the runaway couple. It was Darcy who had paid Wickham's debts and bribed him to marry Lydia, settling a further £1,000 on her. He did it all, Mrs. Gardiner wrote, for your sake. Soon after this, Mr. Bingley returned to Netherfield, and with him Mr. Darcy. Bingley, free from his friend's interference, quickly resumed his attentions to Jane. He was a frequent visitor at Longbourn, and soon he had done it. He proposed, and Jane's quiet happiness was complete. While the family celebrated, a grand carriage arrived at Longbourn. It was Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She had come, she announced, having heard a scandalous rumour that Elizabeth was to marry her nephew, Mr. Darcy. "Has he?" Lady Catherine demanded. "Has my nephew made you an offer of marriage?" "Your ladyship has declared it to be impossible," Elizabeth replied. "It ought to be so. But your arts and allurements may, in a moment of infatuation, have made him forget what he owes to himself. Tell me, once for all, are you engaged to him?" "I am not." "And will you promise me never to enter into such an engagement?" Elizabeth refused. "I will not be thus adjured. I am not to be intimidated. I am resolved to act in that manner, which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness, without reference to you." "Obstinate, headstrong girl!" cried the enraged lady. "I am ashamed of you. I shall not go away till you have given me the assurance I require, and I certainly never shall give it. You can now have nothing further to say." Lady Catherine departed in a fury, but her visit, ironically, gave Darcy hope as I had never allowed myself to hope before. He had, he confessed, been instructed by his aunt's report. A few days later, while walking, Darcy joined Elizabeth. He confessed his feelings are what they were last April, though he was ashamed of the manner of his first proposal. Elizabeth, in a flutter of spirits, at last confessed her own material change. The recollections of what I then said have weighed on me ever since. They talked of their past feelings. She asked when he first began to love her. I cannot fix on the hour, or the spot, or the look, or the words which laid the foundation, he said. It has been coming on so gradually that I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. I am, Elizabeth told her sister later, the happiest creature in the world. I am to be planted at Pemberley. Mr. Bennet, when Darcy asked for his consent, was absolutely silent. "Lizzie," he asked her, "are you out of your senses to be accepting this man? He is rich, to be sure, but will he make you happy?" "He has no improper pride," she assured him, explaining the truth of Wickham and Pemberley. "I am happier than Jane. She only smiles. I laugh." Happy for all her maternal feelings, Mrs. Bennet had the pleasure of seeing 2 daughters married. With the Gardiners, Elizabeth and Darcy were always on the most intimate terms. Darcy, as well as Elizabeth, really loved them, and they were the ones who, by bringing her into Derbyshire, had been the means of uniting them.